Hey everyone, I hope all of you are doing well and welcome back to Isla la Pacífica, where today we are building what is formerly known as the Governor's Mansion, but has since become a full-blown palace because I was building it, so you can kind of expect it to become twice as big as I originally intended it to be. But also I got inspired by what I think I've called my nightmare in other videos, because I got inspired by Peafowl, which is sort of correct for the time period I have set Isla la Pacífica in, because Isla la Pacífica is set around like the 1700s. So anyone who wants to have like a modern feel to Isla la Pacífica, yeah, the place is firmly set in the 1700s, so, or at least around the 1700s. So the, well, inspiration of Peafowl makes sense because by this point Peafowl was basically going on or booming up or just growing. But also, if you want to get to Isla Pacífica, yeah, you need a time machine. Although maybe you could find something similar to Isla Pacífica because it's basically inspired mostly by like Havana, the Dominican Republic, also for some reason Colombia, so yeah. But otherwise you need a time machine. But anyway, so I already said in the previous video that we were going into the jungle for the Governor's Palace, or by this point it was still the Governor's Mansion, because by this point the Versailles inspiration hadn't fully kicked in. But it's also not completely true that we're into the jungle, because by this point most of the jungle surrounding the Governor's Palace was already gone, because let's just say the governor doesn't want the jungle on his doorstep. Also, let's just say that whenever I build something, I first of all remove most of the foliage surrounding it and then I place it back, because it's much easier to build in an empty place than some place that's just completely littered with trees. Even if I just took out the biggest trees, there were still just too many trees there. But we can just go with the excuse that the governor, of course, doesn't want the jungle right out front of his doorstep. But this location behind the waterfall gave two issues. First of all, the pathing going up to the Governor's Palace, although I could still call it a mansion by this point, but we're just going to call it the Governor's Palace from now on to avoid any confusion. But basically the pathing up towards the palace needed to be broad enough to support carriages, because God forbid that the governor has to walk anywhere. But that also meant that the roads had to be broad, that it needed to not have any stairs, which basically meant that the road needed to basically just curve up into the hillside, because the hill was kind of steep. It could have been a very easy job to do if I allowed myself to have stairs, but of course a carriage doesn't handle stairs very well, so that was basically no-go from then on. So that's basically what we're doing right now, with trying to do some, I would say, fake terraforming, because by this point, well, I already cut out a little bit of the mountain, and the mountain on the right side of the Governor's Palace is, by the end of this, somewhat completely sawn off. So the mountain is still there, or at least the base is still there. There's a little bit of the top left, but most of it will be sort of terraformed or landscaped away, which makes kind of sense because the Governor's Palace is inspired by Versailles, and Versailles with its gardens is, I think, one of the biggest landscaping projects of that time period. Yeah, also lighting was a little bit of an issue because the Governor's Palace otherwise would sit in the complete shadow of the mountain. So it makes sense that for the governor, of course, there is enough money or financial means to do that kind of landscaping. There's that incentive because, of course, having this big, very structured garden that's completely landscaped is going to impress people, especially if they know what was there before. But this led also into an issue, but I should talk about that when we get to it. Although that structured garden thing is basically the shortest thing that I'm going to show you. So I should start now by talking about the palace. Though I do for sure know that the gardens are going to be a big talking point, because I don't like building structured gardens. Or at least I don't really have the mind to do that. I can build it and it's not really, well, let's just say structured gardens are just my weakest point to build. Well, I can get inspiration for it, but it's just not something I saw myself doing at any point. I think I've a lot of times just said I never want to build anything like the Versatile Gardens, and yeah, let's just say I do that in this episode. Kind of eye-opening for me. But anyway, by this point I could still call this, well, now palace, but by then it was still the mansion, because it was inspired by the governor's palace, although I do know that it has a real name in Havana. So if you search governor's palace in Havana, you will probably find the place. You will also find that it looks nowhere like that place. I could blame that mostly on the color, because I wanted to have the governor's palace of Isla la Pacífica to be this sort of reddish color. But yeah, it also reminded me somewhat of like a British place or just some kind of university. I don't know which one because there are too many to count and I don't want to go too much into that, but I just blame that on the red color. Also, I should mention that this is actually also an habitat. Yeah, this just shows how much after or how much thought there goes into the animals. But this is the habitat of the peafowls, or I could call it peacocks, but I don't think YouTube really likes for me to call it peacocks because obvious thing going on with that. But I could make that work because of course this is the governor's palace. He probably imports those very exotic looking animals. So just those gardens just want peafowls. They need peafowls to survive. They don't, but that's basically what I'm going for with this, so that there's some kind of incentive also for like the peeps in PlanetZoo to actually come up to this place. So it is a completely walkable habitat. By this point you can still see that the building clips into the mountain, but as I said before, that mountain is going to be sort of. The mountain to the left is actually mostly intact, but the mountain on the right, yeah. I wanted to say he got castrated, but I don't. Well, it is the tip that got cut off. I should start talking about something else if I don't want to get demonetized, but I don't really care about that. I mean, I've never actually gotten any video demonetized, even though I talk about, well, sometimes just human sacrifices. I don't know how YouTube has never really took any kind of interest in that video where I talked about human sacrifices for at least 2 minutes. Yeah, that's Temple in Khan al-Bashar. I have no idea why that wasn't demonetized. But anyway, so of course for the governor's mansion, or by now governor's palace, because by now you can clearly see the Versatile influence, well, I wanted to have a tower, of course, because I can't go a single episode without building a tower. So that's why the governor's palace got a tower. I have no idea or reasoning behind this tower. I don't really see any functional meaning or just function to this tower besides just looking pretty, but then that can actually be the complete function, just to look pretty. But also I wanted to have that sort of layered effect to the governor's palace, that it wasn't all built at one period of time, or at least in one instance. It was sort of like added onto, so this tower was maybe added onto it. Actually, this tower was probably added onto the original building before the facade that you see right now. Because I do expect that facade to sort of be built after, well, when Versatile was like booming, then the governor, of course, wanted to sort of emulate Versatile, because that was like the biggest point of that period of time, because everyone wanted to sort of emulate France, or at least Versatile. And also, I do realize that by this point I have probably mispronounced Versatile 100 times. I don't really care about it, although I did look up how to pronounce it, but you guys know that whenever the commentary just goes on a little bit, then I just lose complete knowledge of how to pronounce words. And also Versatile's just like tapirs is just a word that I, for some reason, never really pronounced correctly. But now to somewhat of a short thing, building the fences, because again, the governor of course doesn't want the jungle to get anywhere near his palace, but also doesn't want the peasants to get anywhere near his palace, so he just builds a big ass fence. Because, yeah, why not? You don't want a rebel to get into your palace and your well manicured, basically millimeters garden, because, yeah, God forsake that. I don't know why I really make the governor look like, well, basically an asshat, but for some reason I just think he is a bit like that. And for some reason I also got into like the story of like, well, I don't build that because, well, I haven't built that yet, because this is actually sort of a strange episode, because by the time that I am recording this commentary, the building is not completely done. But I'm now sort of speaking into the future and hoping that I do remember this while I'm continue building this. But I did want to build like a gazebo, because I just got, I don't know where I got this idea actually from, maybe from Pirates of the Caribbean, maybe. Isla la Pacífica is also somewhat inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, words are completely losing myself after the 10-minute mark. But anyway, I was sort of thinking of adding like a gazebo, and then for some reason, this is like the weirdest idea I have ever got for anything building wise. I wanted to see if I can build those 17th century dresses. And before you think I'm crazy, I just wanted to go with the story that the governor's daughter, of course, lives here because her father works here. But then I just got this idea that he also tries to emulate France, or at least Versailles, and wants to get, you know, the latest in fashion and such. I have literally no clue how I got this idea, but that's basically what I wanted to do going forward. I have literally no idea, because I wouldn't say I'm not completely interested in fashion, but I'm not really interested in that fashion. Does that make sense? I don't know. But I literally have no idea how I got to that idea, besides maybe, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean. So yeah, you will not see any of that in today's episode, so I don't know why I included that in there, but the more you guys know. I literally still don't know why I wanted to go with the story of like the governor's daughter for some reason. Maybe because I wanted to tie it in with the plantation, which we are going to get, and which is probably going to be the more, well, maybe controversial episode, because of course 1700s, yeah, slavery is a thing. I'm not going to skip around that and try to hide it. I think it's best to just acknowledge the facts and know that it's for, well, let's just say most of the people back then was probably one of the darkest periods in history. But anyway, I should talk more about the gardens, because as I said, this was a little bit... I never imagined myself to build gardens structured like this. If Yoda is watching, I still don't know how you do it with your PlanetZoo, because I don't have a mind to build these kinds of gardens. I didn't. I just thought like, alright, I never built these. How can I do these? Because I don't like those really structured gardens, or at least they look pretty, but I never saw myself building them, so I never really tried to learn how they work. You will probably see that because the gardens are still a bit chaotic, because I like the original feel of some gardens, that it's like sort of overgrown, or at least nature takes a more prominent role instead of pure landscaping. So again, Yoda, I have no idea how you do it. But kudos to you, because I don't like building these. This is the primary reason why this video is actually late, because the building got on quite quickly. Also the reason why I'm not planning to build any of the houses of Isla Pacífica on screen, because all of the houses are basically a diluted version of the governor's mansion or palace by now. Gardens, they're still kind of rough, and I kind of gave myself the excuse of like, yeah, this is set in the Caribbean. Of course, you're going to have like a little bit of a jungle influence, but I can admit that it's basically mostly a cop-out because I don't know how to build these gardens. I wanted to say I don't want to build these gardens, but I basically just don't know how to. By now I know how to, but going into this thing, didn't know how to make these things work. Basically, I just looked up a lot of pictures of the gardens of Peafowl and then it sort of got underway. Also, going into the storyline again, or history, I could make this somewhat work because of course this is a palace that was like added onto. It wasn't really like built in one instance, so the gardens probably were also a later addition to this place. And then maybe like part of the gardens were added by this person, then the next governor, because I don't know for sure if it's like hereditary or appointed, but knowing politics back in that time, it could be hereditary because the father just made sure that his son was appointed, maybe. That's actually going to be it for the speed build. So right now we're going into the speed build. So we're back for the tour of the Governor's Palace, and sadly it's not completely finished yet, because while the front door of the Governor's Palace is still missing, a little bit of the garden is not finished yet, and this part is still floating, so I still need to build a bridge for it. Although those things I will probably do off screen because they're not that important. Well, the front door is probably important for the Governor, but well, the build can work without it. But anyway, so I really like that this, well, palace by now is just completely overtaking just everything in this area. Like, you can't go through this area without looking at the Governor's Palace. And you can actually see this tower and this side wing from anywhere on the island. So it's kind of in a fight with the church, actually, in the way of wayfinding, because, well, if we can pan over to the church so you guys also know where exactly we are. There is the church, and then you have the Governor's Palace here. And, well, you can either look for the Governor's Palace or the church in the way of finding where you are exactly on Isla la Pacífica. But I just really like that it's just completely, well, a little bit overdone with all the marble, all the pillars, and just, it is impressing and also intimidating at the same time. Which I think is the whole thing of, well, Baroque architecture. It's supposed to be just completely amazing, but also slightly intimidating. Or at least, well, mostly the impressing part. But anyway, we should start with the actual walking part of this tour. So the next episode will probably feature this area, which is probably going to be for the flamingos. This also gives me the time to actually build a bridge for this spot. But also for some reason I sometimes get stuck on this spot. So going up here, oh, this time I don't. But there's some rocks I think that conflict with the actual path. And also squirrel. Yeah, I actually hide quite a few of those squirrel topiaries around Isla Pacífica and Cayenne al-Bashar. So if you guys ever get Isla Pacífica in your hands, try to find all the squirrels. But yeah, I don't understand the stack, because look at those feet. How can a plant grow to that? It's tiny. But yeah, also the gazebo that I briefly talked about. And this is supposed to actually be a peafowl habitat, but let's just get this view, because I really just like that it's just a little bit overdone, as I said, but also just shows the importance of the governor of Isla Pacífica. Maybe a little bit conflicting with the church, so there might be a little bit of a power struggle going on there. Although I do think that the church actually, well, no, let's just keep it at power struggle. But as I said, yeah, this is just trying to just impress you, but also is slightly intimidating at the same time. I'm also still thinking of like adding an actual roof to this tower, but then you might have already seen it looks very similar to the church bell tower. and I don't want it to be somewhat of a copy of that one. So I'm actually quite happy now with the just flat roof, so I might keep it this way. Just because it's a little bit different, and also this tower, I don't really see it having any function besides looking pretty. But anyway, we are not actually going through the guest entrance, we're going through the service entrance, so we're following this thread. But yeah, I call it the service entrance, but it's basically just the entrance for the staff, because the staff can't go through the guest entrance. Yeah, one peafowl. Well, there are actually, I think, 3 male ones and there are 2 baby female ones. I have no idea what happened to the mother, she was just gone. Like, she didn't die or anything, she was just gone. But I really like how the gardens turned out. They are a little bit more chaotic than the ones that you see in like Versailles, but I really just like it. Also, well, the staff are really liking this area, let's just say that. Mostly because this is the only habitat, even though that was literally just one sentence in the entire commentary talking about that there were actually peafowls in here. Or peacocks, but we know that YouTube doesn't like the second part of that word. But anyway, yeah, I really just like this view with the sun and everything. Like, actually the service entrance has like the best view of the building, I would say. But anyway, going through the gardens, and all of these spots are actually usable by the guests, which creates a little bit of a problem for the actual peafowls. Just the sunlight hitting this building. I'm really glad that I removed that mountain, because otherwise we wouldn't have this. But yeah, it's completely just over the top, a little bit overdone. But that's most Baroque buildings, I think. It's just a little bit too much, but tastefully too much, I would say. But I still can't understand how some people can really do these like very well manicured, structured gardens. Well, for Kern al-Bashar, I will probably do a little bit of an in-between between this and total chaos for the palace gardens, because that's actually what we're going to do with Kern al-Bashar in the next phase. We will build the palace, but it's not going to be anywhere like this, but I really just like how the sunlight is hitting this building, so I'm really glad that I removed that mountain. But you can just see how important it all looks. And then you have the servant squatters. Yeah, this wasn't built as the servant quarters, I just wanted a little bit more of a demure wing to the building, because the other wing was, well, that was built later, but that's a little bit more like the over-the-top rest of the palace. But yeah, this is probably just the servants' quarters. Then you have a little bit of like a shelter for the peafowls, because as I said, all of the pots are usable by the guests, which creates the problem that the peafowls don't have anywhere to hide. So I basically just created this area so that it kind of looks like the keeping of the peafowls is just a hobby of the governor. I mean, he will probably have the money for it. Hey, one of them is going to greet us and he's also screaming, but you guys don't hear that, probably, because I will take away... Well, maybe I will keep in the game music or the in-game sound. The gazebo that I briefly talked about. And no, I did not build those dresses yet, but I am really thinking of building those. Just so that the story of like the governor's daughter makes a little bit sense in my head. But yeah, going back, you can already see the lower part of the actual, well, the first part of the building doesn't really have anything. So here was supposed to be the front door and actually an entrance to the courtyard. But I did not get around to that yet. You could also see that that area of the gardens is not completely finished yet. But I still think it's like in a state that I can really show it to you guys. I really just... This is just the best. Like, again, the servants have just the best view of the building when coming into the habitat. Because it's somewhat of a habitat still, but doesn't really look like it, well, besides the fence. But yeah, I just imagine like the governor really holding like balls and banquets here and just, well, everything. And then of course you can just overlook, well, this tree is now in the way, but he could overlook the entire town. And also is actually at a higher elevation at the church. So again, I know this is just a story in my head and I can't really do anything to make it appear like such in-game, but it just looks like it's a little bit of a who's bigger fight in between the governor and the church. Who holds the most power in Isla la Pacífica? Probably seeing this building the governor. Although this might just also be because, well, let's just say politics back then, you could probably earn a lot of money by just sucking up to the king. But yeah, the Peafowls really are just an afterthought. Although they were originally planned for this area, they later just, well, they are completely overshadowed by this building. But anyway, that's actually it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do and want to see more, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And I wish you all an amazing day. The next video should be normally out on Wednesday, so we will actually have 3 videos this week, probably. But anyway, again, that's it. I wish you all an amazing day. Bye bye.